Stories have a unique way of bridging gaps in understanding, and few authors harness that power as skillfully as the mind behind Freewater. With a background in political science and public policy, she has used her voice to explore race, culture, and community through travel writing and historical works. Her debut novel has earned both the Newbery Medal and Coretta Scott King Award, becoming a New York Times bestseller and a vital contribution to children's literature. Get ready to meet the talented Amina Luqman-Dawson.
Hi. Hi, Christopher.
Amina, your journey to becoming a writer is rooted in childhood filled with books and critique sections with your sister. Can you share how those early moments shaped your love for storytelling and inspired you to write for young readers?
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate being here. Yes, that's a great question. So I am very lucky in that my sister was an early and fervent reader, and her avid reading like ethic sort of it bled onto me. She's 2 years older than I am, so you can imagine, she's my older sister. So I'm like, if she's doing it, maybe I should do it too. And it actually started with me reading all the books that she would read because I'd gone into it. I'd been in class, and my teacher in third grade had said my reading wasn't very good. And I was like shocked. I'm like, is it? I didn't even understand, like that as a concept. And so I started reading what she read. And then after a while, I started reading things on my own. And then after a while, we started coming together to critique books. Like we would read during the summer, read a stack of books, and then we would sit down together and we were like Siskel and Ebert. I don't know if you guys know them now, but they were like a duo of film critics. And so we would pretend like we were them and we would go back and forth on what we thought of books. And it really just created this space where I felt like I could think about books as sort of owning them in a way, like my opinion mattered and what I felt, how I thought they began in the middle and the end and the characters and so it was a good way of sort of claiming literature. And I really appreciated that at that time because I was raised, my sister and I were both raised in this sort of pretty like not strict. My mom wasn't totally strict, but she controlled a lot of what we watched on TV. So like things like, The Love Boat or anything like that, she was like, I don't think so. And so, but in reading, she didn't care. As long as we were reading, she didn't matter. None of that mattered. So we would read like all sorts of things, which I love. And so we had complete control over that. And so to me, taking ownership of reading in your life as a kid, it really helped me. And that magical time in reading, I think, made it so that I really wanted Free Water. That was like middle grade time. And so it made me want to definitely have Free Water be a middle grade novel. And because it was the most magical time of reading for me. It's when I did it purely for the joy of it before college came along and sort of took away some of that joy and gave us so much reading to do. It was wonderful.
What was your favorite genre to read?
Oh, as a kid, I was a definite fiction person. I definitely enjoyed anything that had a little action, thrill, and of course, like kid romance type things. I was not really into deep kind of things. I just liked to have fun and disappear into a world. And so, to me, when there was action involved, like Free Water has a lot of that. To me, it made me, I wanted the author to make me want to keep reading. I didn't want it to feel like I had to. Like, no, I want you to make me turn the page.
What inspired you to explore Maroon communities in Freewater, and how did you balance historical accuracy with creative storytelling?
Absolutely. So Maroons to me, they are this wonderful nugget of history that one to me I hadn't heard of until I was in college. And so I felt like if I could introduce kids to this concept early on, what a wonderful gift that would be. And it's a wonderful new way to kind of access this old history. So this concept of enslaved in the South versus free in the North is suddenly grayed by this idea of like, could you have been found ways to be free in the South, even though, it creates this bit of extraordinary humanity. And so enslaved folks is like, so are enslaved folks who managed to find a way to go into the wilderness live free, this sort of white establishment of the plantation, and focused it completely on what the voices of and the thinking African Americans at that time. And once you decenter the plantation from the enslavement story, you're able to really hear, I feel like, and listen to and fully understand these characters in a new way. And so a Maroon community gives you that kind of like just a safe space to explore really hard things. And then you realize it's not just hard things that are there, it's just life. It's kids doing fun things, making poor choices as kids do, and exploring the world. And once you can put them in that position, kids, I felt that read the book, kids suddenly start seeing connections between them and the enslaved characters or formerly enslaved characters there, which is the big purpose for Freewater, for any reader to read it and feel like, oh, I really want to be around these kids. I want to be in this time. I want to be, even though it's a terribly difficult time, but because that humanity is there, you want to be part of it. And so once you can infuse this full breath of a life in this really hard time, then you create a connection. And I feel like a lot of kids, at least for myself, weren't necessarily raised with a conscious effort to create that connection. We want to know the history, but to me, that connection, that heart connection, is what Freewater offers as well, which I think is equally as important as knowing the history. Oh, and then the second part of your question about managing historical fact versus fictional endeavors. And I constantly went through this with Freewater. And the thing is, a lot of people that read Freewater, they're like, oh, it's like mostly made up because there's more to it. One that's real, that you wouldn't expect, and some of the things you think are real are not as what you expected. So there's actually a really interesting mix. Now, I'm lucky in that two things are one, there is an extensive Maroon history outside of this country. And so as soon as you go to the Caribbean, to Jamaica, to South America, to the Maroon communities that were so strong that if you go there to that same land today where they separated themselves to, you can still find the descendants of those Maroons. And so their traditions, their history was very rich and full. And so I pulled from some of that, but as well too, the Great Dismal Swamp and other lesser known places here in the United States, there is research out there that has been done that has shown just bits. Now you get more nuggets of that information, but it's there that inspired Freewater. So for example, the tree people. Everyone's like, oh, that has to be fake, right? Like the tree people are these folks that protect Freewater. They totally festoon themselves or put on all this natural foliage in order to camouflage themselves in the swamp. And that's totally drawn from me reading about Maroons in Jamaica and how they would protect their community. Absolutely, where festoon themselves in foliage in order to fight for their right to be there. And so I thought, oh, gotta use that. Or when it came to the foods they ate, I looked up the Great Dismal Swamp, where it's sort of loosely based on all the foods from the wild ginger to wild hogs that were caught there, all brought from learning about the Great Dismal Swamp. But there are certain really real aspects like Suleiman, who is painted in such a way that he actually seems like he wouldn't be real, but he's
Mhm.
based on real enslaved people who who became maroons, who lived in the wilderness and would go back to plantations and take from the plantations and bring what they needed back to their wilderness. And that makes total sense, right? Because a lot of enslaved folks would not have had nor known of ways to survive completely with what they found in their wilderness. So yeah, there are some really cool things that I might paint in ways that look like fantasy or that look like just my imagination, but they actually come from extraordinarily wonderful bits of history. But I can say that the Sky Bridge, I made that up. I put that in. I thought it was a wonderful way to separate the enslaved world to the free world.
Writing about freedom and resistance against the backdrop of American enslavement must have been emotionally challenging, especially in today's turbulent times. How did you navigate those emotions while crafting the story?
Well, one, I was fortunate in that I wrote Freewater at a time when book banning and things like that was not on the table as it is today. Our books weren't being attacked in such a clear and present way. Two, I think it's interesting because when I was younger, the history scared me. It is shocking that I would then be a person to write such a story, to write about the thing that probably scared me most. And I found that by writing it and controlling the environment, controlling, having my imagination go where it wanted, it really helped me have the courage and the strength to deal with really difficult history. Because it's true, when you read the actual historical documents about what enslavement was, it was far more treacherous than our imaginations even can take us. Because we, as free people, there's certain things you just have a difficult time navigating. You know, you think you understand what it would mean to not be free, but you don't really. And so as I read those things, I did find them just gut-wrenching in a way. But when you read them with the eye toward where do you find the humanity in there? Where do you find folks? Where do you find yourself? Like for me, like where did I see, like if I was in that time, where would I have been? Where do you find, what are children doing? It really did create this very healing environment, actually, for me, even though it was really hard history. So, yeah, I'm very lucky in that. Now, in these times when it's this kind of history, along with other things, are being attacked, it's frustrating and it angers me and it makes me feel all the more committed to this work. And it makes me grateful for the people who continue to ask for the work, read the work, put themselves out there to teach the work. And so it makes me, when I'm in front of these teachers, it makes me all the more, I'm like, wow, thank you. Librarians, all these people who are on the front lines now having to make these silent choices about what they teach and take more risk than they should to teach literature. I now turn to them and it's become a courageous act, which is ridiculous, but true.
How do you see Freewater contributing to the movement for greater diversity and inclusion in storytelling, particularly in offering representation to young readers who might not often see their own histories or experiences reflected in books?
I hope that it creates just a new doorway for this next generation to access history. I hope that it provides just a new jumping off point. I originally wrote this story for my son. He really loved adventures. He really loved fast moving books, stories, and loved certain things. So anytime I wrote something, I was always thinking about him. I'm like, would this entertain him? Would he be like bored by now? Would I lose him at this point? And so, um, and so he kept me honest in that. But I always knew that there was a purpose behind it, even though it was like cast in this big, sort of almost magical sometimes environment. The purpose was always to have him have a better connection with his enslaved ancestors than perhaps in the past than I would have had when I was his age, to have him, even though in the midst of this hard history, still want to access this history and keep it close. And to have other kids, then as I wrote more and more, and as the book came out, to have all kids have that experience. I think we all could benefit from this history and better understanding where we are today, better understanding. I mean, there's a reason why it's being banned. There's a reason why it's considered, off-putting, dangerous, all these things. It's because there's value. There's absolute value in knowing it, and there's absolute value in it ex helping us better understand the society we live in today, and then helping us better understand how we can address the inequities that we see. And so I'm excited for kids, this next generation, to have just another avenue, another doorway to access this history.
In today's climate, books like Freewater, which address slavery and African American history, face increased scrutiny in certain regions. With legislation like that in Florida raising concerns about censorship, how do you feel this impacts young readers' access to these important stories, and are you concerned about the possibility of Freewater being targeted?
I am concerned that it's being targeted, but even more than it being targeted, like let's say it doesn't show up on any list, book ban list. That is only half the point. The other part of the point is the environment that these bans are creating for teachers and librarians is one of threat. And so as soon as you introduce that idea that your career, your ability to do your job, your personal safety perhaps, or you might be attacked by a particular group or organization or parent who feel all the more emboldened to come in and tell you what you should be teaching. As soon as you feel like you might have to defend your right to teach what you think is valuable, then that is going to automatically decrease the number of teachers that will choose to do that, who would choose to sort of take that leap to teach the work. And so even if Freewater doesn't show up on a list, I am not naive enough to think that it hasn't been impacted by this environment. That a teacher who just doesn't have the energy or the time to have to explain and fight for a book will then say, well, maybe I'll just do another book. Maybe, there's lots of books out there. Why not this another book? So yeah, I do think it. Now, what's happening in Florida, it's it is it's horrendous. I mean, I think if you'd have spoken to me 10 years ago, I'd have been like, are you kidding, right? Like, are you kidding? Like to have it, it's not as if these book bans are coming into a realm where this history and the literature attached to it, or let's say literature related to gay, bisexual, queer folks, was all that ubiquitous and everywhere and being taught all the time. No, it wasn't as if we had that much to begin with. And so these are relative to sort of more white narratives, more mainstream heterosexual narratives. No, these are this is an industry where we are still fighting just to make sure the books are published, make sure the stories are out there. And so to have this legislation kind of threaten it is horrendous. And it's they come for the art first. And so let's not stop it. Let's not think that that ability to sort of like curtail what we say through our art is not going to ultimately impact what's being said overall in society and our ability to speak freely in society.
If the possibility of free water being banned and censorship, how do you think those two directly impact young readers?
Well, they definitely will impact whether or not they even know the book exists, whether or not they even are taught the book. So I think Free Water is a fabulous book, but I don't necessarily think it's a book that if a kid's like walking through like Barnes and Noble or something, they'll be like, oh, found it. This is it. It looks fantastic. Um, I think, if I was a young person, I'd be like, maybe, I don't know. I don't know. It's a nice picture. But I think that even as I wrote Free Water, I knew I was dependent on parents and teachers and librarians to be that extra bit of, hey, come on over here. I know it doesn't look like what you normally, might read, but let's give it a try. Or a teacher pulling it up in class and the kids being kind of like, "Ugh," and they start reading it, and then they're surprised by how much they're pulled in and how much they actually love it. So I always anticipated Free Water to have a boomerang effect, sort of like, I don't know if I want to read it. But then when you're made to read it at bedtime or something, come on, you'll be like, oh, that's the best book ever. Like you would, and that sometimes has an even more impactful effect because you didn't expect to like it. So in this environment, if you have adults that are under threat to teach it or to encourage it in libraries, then it really will have a devastating impact on whether or not a young person might pick it up. And so, because it's not like Diary of a Wimpy Kid or something like, oh my goodness, like it's different.
Amina, your ability to bring history to life, whether through nonfiction or fiction, is truly inspiring. Through your work, you not only capture the resilience of African American communities, but also create unforgettable characters like Homer in Freewater. who bridge the past and present with depth and clarity. Thank you
Mm.
for sharing your journey and insights with us. We eagerly await the powerful stories you'll continue to tell and the lasting impact they'll have on readers everywhere.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you very much. Great questions.